Good evening. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Tonight's collection features 32 testimonies from royal physicians, guards, chaplains, servants, and household staff who encountered malevolent supernatural entities within palace walls, spanning the 12th through to the 19th centuries. These accounts document demonic possessions, vengeful phantoms, cursed objects, and ancient evils that haunted Windsor Castle, Hampton Court Palace, the Tower of London, Kensington Palace, and other royal residences across Britain. Support my efforts by liking and subscribing. So let's begin. Turn down the world, embrace the darkness, and let the forgotten be heard. Case file NOA1427R. Classification: Testimony of Royal Physician. Date of statement: 14th February 1427. Location: Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. Testimony: I, Dr. Edmund Hartley, Royal Physician to His Majesty, do testify about the malevolent presence within the King's private chambers. On the night of 12th February, I was summoned to attend His Majesty, who had fallen into a terrible fever. Upon entering the royal bedchamber, I felt a coldness that no fire could dispel. His Majesty lay trembling, his eyes fixed upon the corner of the room, where shadows gathered most thickly. He spoke in a voice not his own, uttering words in a tongue I did not recognize. I approached to examine him, but was struck by an invisible force that threw me against the stone wall. The candles in the chamber began to flicker, though there was no draught. I witnessed the bed curtains move as if pulled by unseen hands. His Majesty's body convulsed, and he pointed toward the window with a trembling finger. There, pressed against the glass from within, appeared the mark of a hand, though no one stood near it. The temperature dropped until my breath became visible in the air. I heard a voice whisper in my ear, speaking of ancient claims to the throne and blood debts unpaid. The king cried out that the shadow demanded his crown, his soul, and his firstborn child. I attempted to bless the room, but the words died in my throat as if stolen by the darkness itself. Objects began to move across the chamber. Books flying from shelves and furniture sliding across the floor. The royal portrait upon the wall turned dark. The painted face transformed into something grotesque and leering. I saw scratches appear upon His Majesty's arms, as if clawed by invisible talons. The shadow in the corner grew larger, taking the shape of a crowned figure, with hollow eyes. It moved toward the bed with deliberate malice, and I could do nothing but watch in terror. His Majesty screamed that it claimed him as its rightful vessel, that it would rule through his flesh. I fled the chamber and summoned the royal chaplain, but when we returned, the king lay still and pale. The shadow remained in the corner, watching, waiting. His Majesty recovered enough to speak, but would not say what bargain he had made with the darkness. Since that night, he's been changed, speaking sometimes in that strange tongue when he believes himself alone. The servants report that the shadow still dwells in the corner of the royal chamber. They say it grows stronger with each passing moon, and that the king visits it each midnight. I fear what will become of the realm when the shadow claims him completely. Dr. Edmund Hartley, Royal Physician. Windsor Castle, Berkshire. 14th February 1427. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. This testimony was discovered within sealed medical records at Windsor Castle Archives during renovation work in 1923. Historical records confirm Dr. Hartley's sudden departure from royal service shortly after this date. The king referenced remained on the throne for 3 more years before his mysterious death. End of file. Case file NOA1583M. Classification: Account of Palace Guard. Date of statement, 29th October, 1583. Location, Hampton Court Palace. Surrey, England. Account, I, Thomas Blackwood. Guard of Her Majesty's Palace, do record the evil I witnessed in the haunted gallery. My duty that autumn night was to patrol the long gallery between the hours of midnight and dawn. The palace stood silent, save for the wind that rattled the ancient windows. As I walked the length of the gallery, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, but saw nothing save the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. The footsteps continued, matching my pace exactly, though no figure could be seen. I called out, demanding to know who walked there, but received no answer. A woman's voice began to laugh, a sound filled with malice and bitter hatred. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, as if something long dead had awakened. I saw a pale figure emerge from the wall itself, the form of a woman in a white gown. Her face was twisted with rage, her mouth open in a silent scream that chilled my blood. She moved toward me with unnatural speed, her hands reaching out like claws. I drew my sword, but the blade passed through her form, as if she were made of mist. She whispered words of vengeance and murder, promising to drag me to the darkness with her. Cold fingers touched my throat, though I could see nothing but her terrible face before me. I felt my strength draining away, as if she pulled the very life from my body. The paintings along the gallery wall began to change, the faces becoming skull-like and grotesque. I heard children crying in the distance, their voices filled with terror and despair. The phantom woman spoke of innocent blood spilled within these walls, of secrets buried and never atoned. She said she would haunt this place until every stone was soaked with royal blood. I tried to run, but my legs would not obey, held fast by some invisible power. She placed her mouth near my ear and whispered the names of those she would claim next. I recognized the names as members of the royal household, sleeping peacefully in their beds. The gallery filled with shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. I saw other figures emerging from the walls, pale and hungry, their eyes fixed upon me. They surrounded me, their cold presence pressing in from all sides. Then, as suddenly as it began, the haunting ceased, and I found myself alone once more. But the malevolent presence remained, watching from the shadows, waiting for another night. I reported what I witnessed, but was told to speak of it to no one. The haunted gallery remains, and no guard walks there willingly after dark. Thomas Blackwood, Palace Guard, Hampton Court Palace, Surrey. 29th October, 1583. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Palace records indicate Blackwood served faithfully until his death 3 weeks after this account. The haunted gallery continues to be associated with supernatural activity. Multiple witnesses across centuries report similar encounters with the vengeful phantom, suggesting a persistent and malevolent haunting. End of file. Case file NOA1619K. Classification: Report of Royal Chaplain. Date of statement: 3rd January 1619. Location: Holyrood Palace, Edinburgh, Scotland. Report: I, Father William MacLeod, Royal Chaplain, do report the demonic presence within the royal apartments. I was called to bless the chambers where the king would stay during his visit to Scotland. Upon entering the suite, I immediately sensed a malevolence that made my skin crawl. The crucifixes I carried grew heavy in my hands, as if weighed down by some evil force. I began the blessing, sprinkling holy water upon the threshold and speaking the sacred words. The water turned black as it touched the floor, steaming as if it had struck hot coals. A voice spoke from the empty air, mocking my prayers in perfect Latin. The voice was ancient and filled with terrible hatred for all things holy. I persisted with the blessing, but felt invisible hands pushing against me, trying to force me from the room. The temperature plummeted and frost began to form upon the windows despite the summer season. I heard screaming coming from the walls themselves, the anguished cries of tormented souls. The candles I had lit exploded into flames that burned with an unnatural green color. My Bible flew from my hands and struck the wall with such force that pages were torn from the binding. I saw writing appear upon the walls, words in a language older than Latin, older than anything I knew. The words seemed to writhe and move, changing shape as I tried to read them. A shadow manifested in the center of the room, taking the form of something neither human nor animal. It had eyes that burned with hellish light, and when it opened its mouth, I heard the screams of the damned. The entity spoke my name, though I had never introduced myself. It knew things about me that no earthly being could know, sins I had committed and never confessed. It threatened to drag me to perdition if I continued my blessing. The floor beneath my feet began to tremble, and cracks appeared in the ancient stone. I felt claws rake across my back, though I stood alone in the room. Blood appeared on my vestments, though my flesh remained unmarked. The demon promised to claim any who slept in these chambers, to possess them body and soul. It said it had waited centuries for royal blood, and would not be denied its prize. I completed the blessing through sheer force of will, calling upon every saint and angel for aid. The entity retreated, but did not depart, promising to return when I was gone. I warned the king never to stay in those chambers, but I fear my counsel was not heeded. The apartments remain cursed, and the demon waits there still. Father William MacLeod, Royal Chaplain, Holyrood Palace, Edinburgh, 3rd January 1619. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Father MacLeod's report was sealed by order of the king and remained hidden for nearly 3 centuries. Palace records show the royal apartments were abandoned shortly after this incident and sealed until major renovations in 1856. Multiple occupants have since reported disturbing phenomena. End of file. Case file NOA 1547D. Classification: Journal entry of Lady in Waiting. Date of statement: 7th September 1547. Location: Richmond Palace, Surrey, England. Journal entry: I, Lady Catherine Ashworth, Lady in Waiting to Her Majesty, do record the terror that haunts the Queen's privy chamber. Last night, I attended Her Majesty as she prepared for sleep in her private rooms. The chamber was warm and well lit, yet I felt an unnatural chill creep through the air. Her Majesty complained of whispers that came from behind the tapestries. I checked every hanging, but found nothing save stone walls. As I turned to reassure her, I saw a dark figure standing in the corner where no one had been before. It was tall and wrapped in shadows that seemed to move and pulse with their own life. The figure had no face, only a void where features should have been. Her Majesty saw it too, and began to scream, but no sound emerged from her lips. The shadow moved closer, gliding across the floor without footsteps. I tried to place myself between it and the Queen, but found I could not move. My body was frozen, held by some invisible force that pressed upon me like a great weight. The shadow reached out with what appeared to be an arm, extending toward Her Majesty's bed. Where its touch fell, the bedclothes turned grey, and began to rot before my eyes. A voice filled the chamber, speaking of betrayal and murder, of blood debts and royal sins. It promised to claim the Queen's soul as payment for crimes committed by her ancestors. The entity spoke of children killed in the name of succession, of poison and daggers in the dark. It said it was born from those murders, given form by the rage of innocents destroyed. The windows shattered inward, though no wind blew outside. Glass rained down upon us, yet neither of us was cut. The shadow grew larger, filling half the chamber with its malevolent presence. I heard other voices joining the first, a chorus of the murdered crying out for vengeance. Her Majesty began to weep blood, crimson tears streaming down her pale face. The shadow touched her forehead, and she fell into a swoon, from which she could not be roused. I regained my ability to move and fled to summon help. When we returned with guards and physicians, Her Majesty lay unconscious and cold as death. The shadow was gone, but the chamber remained freezing despite the summer night. Her Majesty recovered after 3 days, but speaks now of nightmares that plague her every sleep. She says the shadow visits her each night, showing her visions of those who died to secure her throne. The Queen has abandoned those chambers and will not speak of what she witnessed. I too am haunted by what I saw and fear it will return. Lady Catherine Ashworth, Lady-in-Waiting. Richmond Palace, Surrey. 7 September, 1547. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. This journal entry was discovered in a sealed chest at the British Museum in 1891. Historical records confirm the sudden relocation of royal chambers during this period. Lady Catherine's subsequent entries become increasingly disturbed, ending abruptly 3 months later with no explanation of her fate. End of file. Case file NOA 1724P. Classification: Testimony of Royal Steward. Date of statement: 18th November 1724. Location: Kensington Palace, London, England. Testimony: I, James Whitmore, Royal Steward, do testify about the malevolent haunting in the state apartments. For 3 months, I have witnessed events that defy all natural explanation. The haunting began shortly after the death of a royal personage whose name I am forbidden to speak. It manifests most strongly in the King's drawing room, where courtiers once gathered. I first noticed it when I entered the room to inspect the furnishings one November evening. The portraits upon the walls had changed, though no one had moved them. Faces that once smiled now bore expressions of accusation and rage. I heard footsteps pacing the floor above, though I knew those rooms stood empty. The footsteps moved with the rhythm of someone in great agitation, back and forth without cease. As I watched, one of the grand mirrors began to fog over from within. Words appeared in the condensation, written by no visible hand. They spoke of treachery and murder, of secrets that must be revealed. I approached the mirror to read the words more clearly, and saw reflected behind me a figure in royal dress. When I turned, nothing was there, but the reflection remained, staring at me with eyes full of malice. The figure's mouth moved as if speaking, and though I heard no sound, I understood its meaning. It accused the living royals of murder, of poisoning, of plotting its death. The entity promised vengeance upon the entire bloodline, swearing none would rest while it remained unavenged. Suddenly, all the windows in the drawing room flew open at once, admitting a freezing wind. Papers scattered across the room, swirling in patterns that seemed deliberate and threatening. The chandelier began to swing violently, though the wind did not touch it. Crystal droplets fell like rain, shattering upon the polished floor. I heard a woman's voice screaming in German, filled with such anguish that it froze my blood. The doors slammed shut of their own accord, trapping me within. The figure in the mirror stepped forward, as if trying to emerge from the glass itself. I saw its hands pressing against the mirror's surface from within, distorting the reflection. Cracks appeared in the glass, spreading outward from where those hands pushed. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed upon the window panes. I felt the presence of the entity circling me, though I could see nothing. Cold fingers touched the back of my neck, and I heard breathing in my ear. The voice whispered that it would haunt this palace until justice was done. It said it would appear to each royal in turn, driving them to madness or death. Finally, the doors opened, and I fled from that accursed room. Since then, others have reported similar encounters, and the state apartments are used no more. James Whitmore, Royal Steward, Kensington Palace, London, 18th November, 1724. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Whitmore's testimony aligns with palace records indicating the sudden closure of certain state rooms. German court documents suggest political tensions and suspicious deaths during this period. The identity of the vengeful spirit remains officially unconfirmed, though palace staff still report unexplained phenomena in these chambers. End of file. Case file NOA 1642S. Classification: Report of Palace Physician. Date of statement: 21st March 1642. Location: Whitehall Palace, London, England. Report: I, Dr. Tobias Wentworth, physician to the royal household, do report the supernatural affliction affecting the palace nursery. I was summoned urgently to attend the royal children, who had fallen into a mysterious illness. Upon arriving at the nursery, I found all 3 children lying in fever, their skin cold despite their burning brows. The nursemaids were terrified, speaking of shadows that moved across the walls at night. They reported hearing a woman's voice singing lullabies in a language none could identify. The eldest child, a girl of 6 years, pointed to the corner and spoke of the Grey Lady who visited them. She said the Grey Lady told them stories of children who were taken away and never returned. I examined the children and found strange marks upon their arms, like fingerprints burned into the flesh. The marks were icy cold to the touch, though the surrounding skin burned with fever. As I worked, I heard the singing the nurses had described, a melody both beautiful and deeply unsettling. The song seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the nursery. I turned to see a figure materialize near the children's beds, a woman in grey robes. Her face was pale as death, her eyes dark hollows that seemed to absorb all light. She reached toward the youngest child with hands like claws, her fingers unnaturally long. I moved to protect the children, but was thrown back by an invisible force. The entity spoke in Middle English, cursing the royal line for sins committed generations past. She claimed to be a mother whose children were murdered to clear the path to the throne. Her voice dripped with venom as she described how each child had died. She swore to steal the souls of royal children until her own were returned to her. The Grey Lady leaned over the cradle, whispering something to the infant within. The baby's cries suddenly stopped, and its eyes went blank and staring. I called for the chaplain, but the entity only laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She said no prayer could stop her, that she was bound to this place by grief and rage. The nursery grew darker, though it was midday and the sun shone outside. Shadows crawled across the ceiling like living things, reaching down toward the children. The grey lady began to fade, but promised she would return each night. She said the children belonged to her now, marked by her touch. After she vanished, the children recovered slowly, but were never quite the same. They spoke of nightmares where the grey lady came to take them away. The eldest refused to sleep in the nursery ever again, screaming when brought near it. I recommended the nursery be abandoned and the children moved to another wing. My counsel was accepted, but I fear the entity will simply follow them. Dr. Tobias Wentworth, Palace Physician, Whitehall Palace, London, 21st March 1642. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Wentworth's report was discovered among documents salvaged after the Great Fire that destroyed much of Whitehall Palace. Historical records confirm unexplained child deaths in royal households during this period. The Grey Lady has been reported in multiple royal residences, suggesting a persistent supernatural presence. End of file. Case file NOA 1789W. Classification: Account of Royal Architect. Date of statement: 9th July 1789. Location: St. James's Palace, London, England. Account: I, Thomas Pemberton, Royal Architect, do account for these evil presence discovered during renovation work. I was commissioned to oversee repairs to the Chapel Royal within the palace grounds. When workmen began removing old panels from the chapel walls, they uncovered a sealed chamber. Within this hidden room, we found objects of a most disturbing nature. There were bones arranged in patterns that suggested ritual sacrifice. Symbols were carved into the stone floor, signs I recognized from forbidden texts. At the center of the chamber stood an altar blackened by fire and stained with something dark. The moment we breached the chamber, a terrible presence made itself known. The air grew thick and foul, filled with the stench of brimstone and decay. Workmen began to cry out, claiming invisible hands pushed and struck them. Tools flew through the air with violent force, injuring 2 men. I heard a voice speaking in Latin, promising death to any who disturbed this place. The voice came from everywhere at once, resonating through the very stones. One worker collapsed. His eyes rolled back and began speaking in the same ancient tongue. He spoke of a pact made centuries ago, of power purchased with innocent blood. The entity claimed it had been summoned by a royal ancestor seeking dark knowledge. It said it was bound to protect the hidden chamber and punish those who entered. The possessed worker rose and walked toward me, his movements jerky and unnatural. His face was twisted into a mask of hatred that was not his own. He reached for my throat with hands that felt cold as ice. Other workers pulled him back, but it took 5 men to restrain him. The hidden chamber began to fill with smoke, though no fire burned. Within the smoke, I saw shapes moving, figures that were neither human nor animal. They pressed against the walls as if trying to break through into our world. The carved symbols on the floor began to glow with a sickly red light. I heard children crying in the distance, their voices full of terror and pain. The possessed worker broke free and ran toward the altar, screaming that it demanded another sacrifice. We dragged him from the chamber and sealed it once more with all haste. Even through the new masonry, I could hear scratching and pounding from within. The worker recovered, but remembered nothing of his possession. He bore claw marks upon his chest that appeared during the incident. I strongly advised that the chamber remain sealed and the location be forgotten. However, I fear what dwells there cannot be contained forever. Thomas Pemberton, Royal Architect, St. James's Palace, London, 9th July 1789. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Pemberton's account was filed with palace construction records and largely forgotten until recent archival work. No official plans indicate the location of this sealed chamber, and subsequent searches have failed to locate it. Several construction workers left palace service immediately after this incident. End of file. Case file NOA 1591H. Classification: Testament of Royal Guard. Date of statement: 14th May 1591. Location: Tower of London, London, England. Testament: I, Richard Thornton, Yeoman Warder, do testify to the evil that walks the White Tower. My duty requires me to guard the crown jewels housed within the ancient fortress. On the night of 12th May, I stood watch in the jewel house as midnight approached. The tower stood silent, save for the distant call of ravens and the Thames flowing past. As the bell struck 12, I heard footsteps descending the spiral stair from the floor above. I called out the challenge, but received no reply. The footsteps continued their steady descent, growing closer with each moment. I readied my halberd and moved to confront whoever approached. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stair, but no figure appeared. I felt a presence pass me by, cold as winter frost. The torches guttered and dimmed, leaving me in near darkness. I heard breathing behind me, ragged and wet, like someone drowning. When I turned, I saw a man in ancient clothing standing before the jewel case. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, and his head lolled to one side. Blood dripped from his mouth onto the stone floor, though the drops made no sound. His eyes were white and sightless, yet I felt them fixed upon me with terrible intensity. He reached toward the crown with skeletal fingers, and where he touched, the gold tarnished black. I struck at him with my weapon, but the blade passed through him, as if he were smoke. The phantom turned to face me, his broken neck creaking with the movement. He spoke my name, though his lips did not move, and the voice came from inside my own head. He told me he was murdered in this very tower by order of a king who feared his claim to the throne. His body was thrown into the Thames, weighted with chains, never given proper burial. He said he would haunt this place until his bones were recovered and laid to rest in consecrated ground. The phantom promised to drive every guard to madness, to steal their sleep and poison their dreams. He moved closer, and I felt his cold fingers touch my face. Images flooded my mind, visions of his murder, of the blade that cut his throat. I saw his final moments, drowning in the black water with chains dragging him down. I felt his rage and despair, emotions so powerful they seemed to burn through me. When the vision ended, I found myself on the floor, my nose bleeding. The phantom was gone, but the crown remained tarnished where he had touched it. Since that night, I have not slept without nightmares. I see his broken face in every shadow, hear his wet breathing in every quiet moment. Other guards report similar encounters, and many have requested transfer from the White Tower. The phantom grows bolder, appearing now even in daylight hours. I fear he will not rest until his demands are met, or until he has driven us all to despair. Richard Thornton, Yeoman Warder, Tower of London, London, 14th May 1591. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Thornton's testament was discovered in Tower archives during cataloguing in 1847. Historical records confirm multiple unexplained deaths of guards during this period. The phantom's identity remains uncertain, though several nobles vanished under suspicious circumstances during the late Tudor period. Strange phenomena continue to be reported. End of file. Case file NOA 1678L. Classification: Journal of Palace Chambermaid. Date of statement: 26th October 1678. Location: Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. Journal: I, Mary Cooper, chambermaid to the royal household, do record the horror within the old chapel. My duties require me to clean the private royal chapel each morning before dawn. For weeks, I have noticed strange occurrences that fill me with growing dread. The altar cloth bears stains that appear overnight, dark marks that resist all cleaning. The crucifixes turn themselves to face the wall, as if rejecting the holy space. I hear chanting in Latin coming from within the walls, voices speaking in unison. This morning, I entered the chapel and found every candle lit, though I had extinguished them the night before. They burned with flames of unusual color, casting shadows that moved against the light. The air was thick with incense, though no censer had been used. I approached the altar to begin my work and saw that the Bible lay open. The pages were torn and scattered, words scratched out with such violence the paper was gouged. Blood was spattered across the holy book, still wet and glistening. I turned to flee and found the chapel doors had closed, though I had left them open. A figure knelt before the altar, dressed in robes of black. I recognized the style as belonging to monks who lived centuries past. The figure turned to look at me, and I saw his face was a skull wrapped in rotting flesh. His eyes burned with unholy light, and his mouth moved in silent prayer. I tried to speak, but found my voice stolen. My throat closed tight with terror. The monk rose and moved toward me, gliding rather than walking. He carried a knife in his skeletal hand, the blade stained with old blood. Behind him, other figures emerged from the shadows, all dressed in the same black robes. They formed a circle around me, chanting in that dead language. I felt their hatred like a physical force, pressing upon me from all sides. The lead monk pointed at me with his knife, and I felt a burning pain across my chest. I looked down to see 3 scratches appear through my dress, blood welling from the wounds. The monks continued their chant, and I understood they were cursing me, cursing the royal family. They spoke of betrayal and dissolution, of their monastery destroyed and their order scattered. They vowed vengeance upon all who served the crown, to haunt this place until the world's end. The chapel grew darker, the candles burning now with black flames. I saw visions of terrible things, murders and tortures, all committed within these walls. The monks showed me the sins of kings and queens, the blood on royal hands. Finally, they released me, and I fell to the floor gasping for breath. When I looked up, they had vanished, but their presence remained. The scratches on my chest have not healed, and weep constantly despite all treatment. I can no longer enter the chapel without feeling their eyes upon me. I hear them chanting every night, their voices growing stronger. I fear what will happen when their curse reaches its completion. Mary Cooper, chambermaid, Windsor Castle, Berkshire. 26th October, 1678. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. This journal was found hidden beneath floorboards during renovation work in 1834. Historical records confirm dissolution of monasteries in the Windsor area during Henry VIII's reign. Mary Cooper vanished without trace shortly after this entry. Her disappearance never explained. Similar phenomena reported intermittently over subsequent centuries. End of file. Case file NOA 1735B. Classification: Report of Royal Musician. Date of statement: 5th December 1735. Location: Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, England. Report: I, Sebastian Gray, Royal Musician, do report the malevolent presence in the music gallery. I have served in the royal household for 15 years, performing for kings and courtiers. The music gallery at Hampton Court has always been my domain, where I practice and prepare. Last month, something changed, and the gallery became a place of terror. It began when I stayed late one evening to rehearse a new composition. As I played my violin, I heard another instrument join me, a harpsichord playing in harmony. I stopped, but the harpsichord continued, the keys pressing down as if played by invisible hands. The melody it played was beautiful, but filled with such sadness it brought tears to my eyes. I approached the harpsichord and saw a figure seated at the keys. She was pale as moonlight, dressed in gowns from a century past. Her fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace, creating music both heavenly and haunting. When she turned to face me, I saw her eyes were empty sockets, weeping blood. She smiled at me, and her teeth were filed to points like those of a beast. She spoke in French, telling me she had been a musician like myself once. She said she had been murdered in this very gallery by a jealous rival who feared her talent. Her body was hidden behind the wall panels, her death covered up to avoid scandal. Now she played for eternity, trapped in the place of her murder. She promised to teach me her secrets, to show me music that would make me the greatest performer in Europe. But the price would be my soul, and I would join her in this cursed place when my time came. I refused, and her smile turned to rage. The harpsichord exploded, keys flying through the air like daggers. One struck my hand, cutting deep, and the wound will not heal properly. The phantom musician screamed, a sound that shattered windows and cracked the plaster. She said I would never play again, that she would haunt me until I accepted her offer. Every instrument in the gallery began to play at once, creating a discord that drove me to my knees. Music stands flew across the room, sheet music swirling in a violent storm. I felt her cold hands grip my injured hand, squeezing until I thought the bones would break. She whispered that she would visit me in my dreams, that she would corrupt every note I played. When I tried to leave, the gallery doors would not open, no matter how I pulled and pushed. The phantom circled me, playing her ghostly harpsichord, the melody growing darker and more twisted. I prayed aloud, and finally the doors flew open, releasing me. Since that night, I cannot perform without hearing her music beneath my own. My compositions have become strange and disturbing, filled with notes I did not intend. Other musicians complain of a presence watching them when they play in the gallery. I fear she is growing stronger, gathering power to claim another soul. Sebastian Gray, Royal Musician. Hampton Court Palace, Surrey. 5th December 1735. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Gray's report remained in palace records until discovered during routine archival cataloguing. He left royal service shortly after this incident and died under mysterious circumstances in 1736. Renovations in the 1890s revealed skeletal remains behind wall panels in the music gallery, confirming elements of his account. End of file. Case file NOA 1624V. Classification: Testimony of Royal Tutor. Date of statement: 11th August 1624. Location: Greenwich Palace, London, England. Testimony: I, Nathaniel Blackstone, Royal Tutor, do testify about the demonic entity that torments the young prince. I was appointed to educate the king's son, a boy of 9 years, with a keen mind and gentle disposition. Our lessons took place in the palace library, a room lined with ancient books and manuscripts. 3 weeks ago, the prince began to speak of a friend who visited him at night. He called this friend the Dark Scholar and said he taught secrets that I would never know. I dismissed it as the imaginings of a child until I witnessed the truth myself. One afternoon, as we studied Latin texts, the prince suddenly stopped and stared at the corner. He said the Dark Scholar had arrived and wished to teach him a different lesson. I saw nothing, but the temperature in the library dropped precipitously. The candles flickered and turned a sickly green color. Books began to fall from shelves, though no one touched them. The prince rose and walked to the corner, speaking to someone I could not see. He laughed at something, and the sound was wrong, too deep and cruel for a child. When he turned back to me, his eyes had changed, the pupils dilated until no white remained. He spoke in perfect ancient Greek, reciting passages from texts no 9-year-old could know. His voice alternated between his own and something much older, much darker. The entity spoke through him, introducing itself as a collector of royal souls. It said it had tutored princes throughout history, preparing them for greatness or damnation. It claimed to have whispered in the ears of tyrants, to have turned gentle children into monsters. The prince's body convulsed, and he began to write on parchment with inhuman speed. The words were in multiple languages, some I recognized and others utterly foreign. They spoke of forbidden knowledge, of rituals to summon things that should never be called. I tried to stop him, to pull him away, but an invisible force threw me against the shelves. The prince laughed again, that terrible adult laugh, and said I was too weak to protect him. The entity promised to teach the boy everything, to mold him into a ruler who would reshape the world. It spoke of dark destinies and blood sacrifices, of power beyond mortal comprehension. Finally, the prince collapsed, and the presence departed as suddenly as it had come. The boy remembered nothing, believing he had merely fallen asleep during our lesson. But I found the parchment covered in his writing, detailing terrible plans and dark knowledge. I brought this to the attention of the king's advisors, but was dismissed as hysterical. The prince continues his nighttime education with the Dark Scholar. I have noticed changes in the boy, a coldness in his eyes, a cruelty in his speech. He speaks of ascending to the throne and the things he will do when he has power. I fear what he is becoming, what the entity is making of him. I was removed from my position for speaking too freely of these matters, but I remain convinced that something evil has claimed the prince's soul. Nathaniel Blackstone, Royal Tutor, Greenwich Palace, London, 11th August, 1624. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Blackstone's testimony was suppressed by royal order and only recently uncovered. Historical accounts of the prince in question indicate a dramatic change in temperament around this period. He grew to become one of England's most controversial monarchs, known for decisions of shocking cruelty. The parchment mentioned was never recovered. End of file. Case file NOA1767N. Classification: Account of Palace Laundress. Date of statement: 23rd February 1767. Location: Kew Palace, Surrey, England. Account: I, Sarah Jenkins, laundress to the royal household. do account for the evil that dwells in the washhouse. My work requires me to attend to the royal linens, washing and preparing them for the family. The washhouse is located in the oldest part of the palace, built upon foundations much older still. For months, I have witnessed things that chill me to my very bones. It began with bloodstains appearing on freshly washed sheets overnight. No matter how thoroughly I cleaned them, the stains would return, always in the same pattern. They formed shapes that looked disturbingly like handprints, as if someone had been held down. I heard weeping in the washhouse late at night, a woman's voice filled with despair. When I investigated, I found no one, but the sobbing continued, echoing from the stone walls. Water in the washing tubs would turn red without cause, taking on the appearance of blood. I saw reflections in the water that did not match reality. Faces of women staring up at me. Their mouths moved as if trying to speak, their eyes pleading for help I could not give. One night, as I worked alone, a figure emerged from the shadows near the great copper. She was young, perhaps 20 years, with dark hair matted with blood. Her dress was torn and soaked, clinging to her thin frame. She approached me slowly, and I could see through her body to the wall beyond. She reached out with pale hands, and I felt an intense cold radiating from her. The phantom spoke in a whisper, telling me she had been murdered in this very place. She said she was a servant who knew too much about royal indiscretions. They drowned her in the washing copper, holding her beneath the boiling water until she died. Her body was burned in the furnace, her ashes scattered, her death unreported and unmourned. Now she remained here, bound to the place of her murder, unable to rest. She said she was not alone, that others joined her, women killed to keep royal secrets. As she spoke, more figures appeared around the washhouse, all bearing marks of violent death. Some had bruised throats, others bore stab wounds, all of them servants who had seen too much. They circled me, their cold presence drawing closer, their whispers growing louder. They demanded I tell their stories, reveal the crimes committed against them. But I feared speaking would bring the same fate upon me. The lead spirit grew angry at my silence, and the washhouse began to shake. The copper boiled over though no fire burned beneath it, scalding water flooding the floor. I felt hands pushing me toward the copper, invisible fingers gripping my arms. They tried to force me toward the boiling water to give me the death they had suffered. I screamed and fought, and finally broke free, fleeing into the night. I returned in daylight with others, but found no trace of the flooding or the spirits. Yet I know they remain, waiting in that cursed place. I have requested new duties, far from the washhouse, but I still hear their weeping in my dreams, calling for justice that will never come. Sarah Jenkins, laundress. Kew Palace, Surrey, 23rd February 1767. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Jenkins's account was recorded by a sympathetic palace official and preserved in private papers. Palace employment records show unusual turnover of laundry staff during this period. Archaeological surveys have revealed a much older structure beneath the washhouse, though its original purpose remains unclear. Reports of phenomena continue sporadically. End of file. Case file NOA 1538R. Classification: Report of Royal Confessor. Date of statement: 16th April 1538. Location: Eltham Palace, Kent, England. Report: I, Father Thomas Sutton, Royal Confessor. do report the possession that afflicts a member of the royal household. I was called to hear the confession of a young noblewoman who served in the Queen's retinue. Lady Eleanor had been acting strangely for weeks, speaking in languages she had never learned. When I entered her chamber, I found her in a state of extreme distress. She was bound to her bed, having attacked several servants with unnatural strength. Her face was twisted into an expression of pure malice, her eyes rolling back in her head. As I approached with my Bible and holy water, she hissed at me like a serpent. She spoke my name, though we had never met, and knew things about me no one could know. The entity within her laughed at my prayers, mocking the power of God. It announced itself as a demon that had dwelt in the palace for generations. It said it had possessed servants of the crown throughout history, driving them to commit terrible acts. Through Lady Eleanor's mouth, it described murders it had inspired, secrets it had uncovered. It claimed to have whispered in the ears of kings, turned counselors against their monarchs. The demons said it fed on the power that flowed through royal halls, growing stronger with each passing year. It promised to destroy Lady Eleanor's mind and body, to use her as a vessel for chaos. I began the rite of exorcism, calling upon all the saints to aid me. Lady Eleanor's body arched impossibly, her limbs bending in ways no human body should move. She spoke in perfect Latin, reciting the Mass backwards, blaspheming every holy word. Black liquid poured from her mouth, steaming and foul-smelling. The room grew dark despite the midday sun streaming through the windows. I heard other voices joining the demons, a chorus of the damned speaking as one. Objects flew through the air, striking me and the servants who had remained to assist. Lady Eleanor broke her bonds and rose from the bed, floating above the floor. Her head turned completely around, her neck twisting with sickening cracks. The demon spoke of ancient pacts and blood sacrifices that had opened the door to its presence. It said the palace was built upon cursed ground, soaked in the ki-as-bunkend blood of innocents. I pressed forward with the exorcism, despite my terror, demanding the entity depart. Lady Eleanor's body began to shake violently, blood pouring from her eyes and nose. The demons screamed with many voices, cursing me and all who served the church. Finally, with a sound like thunder, the entity departed, and Lady Eleanor collapsed. She lived, but remembered nothing of her possession or the demon's words. However, she remained changed, prone to nightmares and episodes of confusion. I reported what occurred to the Archbishop, but was instructed to speak of it to no one else. The demon's claims about the palace trouble me deeply, and I fear it will return. Father Thomas Sutton, Royal Confessor. Eltham Palace, Kent, 16th April, 1538. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Father Sutton's report was discovered in Canterbury Cathedral archives in 1908. Lady Eleanor's identity cannot be confirmed from existing records. Eltham Palace has been associated with numerous supernatural incidents across centuries. Archaeological investigations have uncovered evidence of pre-Christian ritual sites beneath the palace foundations, lending credibility to the demon's claims. End of file. Case file NOA 1712K. Classification. Testimony of Royal Apothecary. Date of statement 8th October 1712. Location: Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. Testimony: I, William Hartwell, Royal Apothecary, do testify about the curse that haunts the royal wine cellar. My duties include preparing medicines and tonics for the royal family and their household. These preparations require access to the extensive wine cellars beneath the castle. 3 months passed. I descended to the lowest level to retrieve a particular vintage. The cellars are ancient, carved from bedrock in times before memory. As I searched among the dust-covered bottles, I heard movement in the darkness ahead. I called out, thinking perhaps another servant had ventured below. No answer came, but the sound of footsteps continued, growing closer. I raised my lantern and saw a figure emerge from between the wine racks. It was a man dressed in clothing of a style centuries out of date. His face was gaunt and grey, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. He carried a bottle in his hands, turning it slowly as he walked toward me. When he opened his mouth to speak, spiders crawled out, dropping to the floor. His voice was dry as ancient parchment, speaking in Middle English. He said he was the king's taster from the time of the first Edwards. He had been poisoned by wine meant for the king, dying in agony over 3 days. His body was thrown into the deepest part of the cellar, buried in a forgotten alcove. Now he remained here, guarding against poison, ensuring no tainted wine reached royal lips. But his protection came at a price, he said, smiling with blackened teeth. Every 7th year, he required a life, someone to join him in his eternal vigil. This year marked the 7th, and he had chosen me. The phantom placed the bottle on a nearby rack, never breaking his gaze from mine. He gestured toward it, indicating I should drink. I refused, backing away, but found the path behind me blocked by other figures. More ghosts emerged from the shadows, all bearing signs of poisoning. Their faces were twisted in death agonies, their skin mottled and discolored. They surrounded me, their cold presence overwhelming. The first spirit took the bottle and forced it toward my lips. I struggled, but their strength was beyond anything natural. The wine touched my mouth, and I tasted something foul beneath the vintage. I felt my throat closing, my vision blurring, my heart racing with the rhythm of death. Just as consciousness began to fade, I heard voices calling my name from above. Other servants had come searching for me, their presence breaking the spell. The phantoms vanished, but the bottle remained. Its contents spilled across the stone floor. Where the wine touched, the stone blackened and cracked. I was carried from the cellar, weak and gasping, my lips burned by what I had tasted. Analysis of the remaining wine showed it contained no poison that modern knowledge could identify. Yet I nearly died from a single drop upon my tongue. Since then, I refused to enter the deep cellars and have warned others of the danger. But the 7th year approaches again, and the phantom will require his tribute. William Hartwell, Royal Apothecary, Windsor Castle, Berkshire, 8th October 1712. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Hartwell's testimony was found among medical records at Windsor. Historical documents confirm the existence of royal tasters, several of whom died under suspicious circumstances. The deep wine cellars have been sealed since 1904, following multiple incidents. No satisfactory explanation for the phenomena has been established by investigators. End of file. Case file NOA 1685M. Classification: Journal of Royal Gardener. Date of statement: 29th June 1685. Location: Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, England. Journal: I, Henry Ashford, Royal Gardener, do record the evil that dwells in the palace maze. I have tended the great maze at Hampton Court for 20 years with pride. The hedges are my responsibility, shaped and maintained to perfection. But something has changed within the labyrinth, something dark and wrong. It began when a courtier entered the maze one evening and did not emerge. We searched throughout the night, calling his name, but found no trace. 3 days later, we discovered him at the maze's center, quite mad. He spoke of a figure in black who walked the paths, appearing and vanishing at will. This figure told him secrets that drove reason from his mind. Since then, others have reported seeing the phantom within the hedge walls. I encountered it myself yesterday while trimming the innermost sections. As I worked, I felt eyes upon me, watching from somewhere close by. I turned and saw a tall figure standing at the path's end. It wore robes of deepest black that seemed to absorb all light. Where its face should have been, there was only shadow, empty and void. It raised one arm and pointed directly at me. I felt a terrible cold wash over me, as if I had been plunged into winter waters. The figure began to move towards me, gliding silently along the gravel path. I tried to run, but found I could not remember which way led out. The maze that I knew better than my own cottage had become foreign and strange. Paths I had walked countless times now led to dead ends I had never seen. The hedges seemed taller, darker, closing in from both sides. I heard whispers coming from within the leaves, voices speaking words I could not understand. The figure in black appeared ahead of me again, blocking my path. It spoke in a voice like wind through dead branches. It said the maze was its domain, built according to patterns that imprisoned it. It claimed to be something older than the palace, older than England itself. When the maze was planted, it had been trapped within the design, bound by the geometric spell. Now it walked the paths eternally, unable to escape, growing more powerful with each passing year. It said it fed on those who entered its domain, stealing fragments of their minds and souls. One day, it would gather enough power to break free and spread its influence beyond the hedges. The figure touched my forehead with a finger of ice. I saw visions of the maze spreading, growing to cover the entire palace, then the city, then the world. I saw people wandering lost within endless green corridors, their eyes empty, their minds consumed. When the vision ended, I found myself outside the maze, with no memory of how I escaped, but I brought something back with me, a piece of its darkness lodged in my thoughts. I dream now of walking those paths forever, becoming part of its collection. The maze calls to me, promising to show me the secret at its heart. I fear I will return, unable to resist its pull. Henry Ashford, Royal Gardener, Hampton Court Palace, Surrey. 29th June, 1685. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Ashford's journal was discovered in a gardener's cottage during demolition in 1821. He disappeared shortly after this entry, last seen entering the maze at dusk. His body was never recovered. The maze design has been modified several times since the 17th century, though whether this was to improve aesthetics or contain something within remains unclear. End of file. Case file NOA 1749T. Classification: Account of Royal Seamstress. Date of statement: 12th January 1749. Location: Kensington Palace, London, England. Account: I, Margaret Fletcher, Royal Seamstress, do account for the cursed tapestry in the Queen's withdrawing room. My work requires me to maintain and repair the fine fabrics throughout the palace. 6 weeks ago, a new tapestry arrived from France. a gift to Her Majesty. It depicted a scene of medieval courtly life, woven with extraordinary skill. But from the moment it was hung, strange events began to plague the withdrawing room. The figures in the tapestry appeared to move when no one was watching directly. Servants swore they saw the woven people turn their heads or shift their positions. I dismissed these claims as fancy until I witnessed it myself. I was alone in the room, stitching a tear in the curtains, when I glanced at the tapestry. A woman woven into the scene was staring directly at me, her eyes following my movements. Her mouth opened, and I heard a whisper, though the tapestry made no sound. She spoke in French, begging me to help her, to free her from her prison. I approached the tapestry and felt intense cold radiating from the fabric. When I touched it, visions flooded my mind with terrible clarity. I saw the woman who had created this tapestry, a master weaver named Claudette. She had been commissioned by a corrupt nobleman to create a work that would trap souls. He had murdered his enemies and bound their spirits into the threads through dark rituals. Now they remained imprisoned in the woven scene, unable to escape or find peace. But the tapestry was more than a prison. It was also a doorway. The trapped souls could reach out and claim new victims, adding them to their number. The vision showed me courtiers who had admired the tapestry too long, found dead with no mark upon them. Their souls had been pulled into the fabric, their bodies left as empty shells. When the vision released me, I found myself on the floor, my hand still touching the tapestry. The woven woman smiled at me, a terrible smile full of hunger and malice. Other figures in the tapestry had turned to face me, their expressions predatory. I tried to pull my hand away, but found it stuck fast to the threads. I felt them pulling at me, trying to drag me into the woven world. My arm began to fade, becoming flat and thread-like, losing its substance. I screamed and tore myself free, ripping threads from the tapestry. Where I pulled away, the tapestry bled, dark liquid seeping from the torn fibers. I fled the room and reported what had occurred to the palace chamberlain. He dismissed my claims and ordered me to repair the damage I had caused. When I returned with needle and thread, I found the tapestry had healed itself. The torn section was whole again, and a new figure had appeared in the scene. It was a woman who looked exactly like me, trapped among the other prisoners. I refused to approach it again, no matter the consequences. Other seamstresses have been assigned to the withdrawing room, but none stay long. They all report the same sensations, the same voices calling from within the threads. 3 servants have died in that room, found with expressions of terror frozen on their faces. Her Majesty has abandoned the withdrawing room entirely, sensing the evil within. The tapestry remains on the wall, growing its collection of souls. I see my own face in it sometimes, watching me from the woven prison. I fear it is only a matter of time before the rest of me joins that image. Margaret Fletcher, Royal Seamstress, Kensington Palace, London, 12th January 1749. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fletcher's account was preserved in palace household records. The tapestry in question was removed and placed in storage in 1751 after several unexplained deaths. Its current location is unknown, with records suggesting it was destroyed by fire. However, similar reports of cursed tapestries in royal collections persist. End of file. Case file NOA 1562W. Classification: Testament of Royal Falconer. Date of statement: 4th July 1562. Location: Hatfield House, Hertfordshire, England. Testament: I, Robert Fairfax, Royal Falconer. do testify to the demon that dwells in the old mews. I have served 3 monarchs in my position, caring for the royal hunting birds. The mews at Hatfield are ancient, built long before the current house. Local folk speak of dark things that occurred there in times past, but I paid no heed. Last month, the birds began to behave strangely, refusing to enter certain perches. They would screech and bait when brought near the oldest part of the building. One falcon tore its own feathers out rather than be placed in a particular alcove. I investigated and found strange markings carved into the wooden beams above. The symbols were unlike anything I had seen, geometric patterns that hurt the eyes to study. That night, I returned to examine them more closely by lantern light. As I studied the carvings, I heard breathing behind me, heavy and rhythmic. I turned and saw a shape in the shadows, massive and crouched. 2 eyes glowed red in the darkness, reflecting my lantern like an animal's eyes. But no animal stood so tall or radiated such palpable malevolence. It moved forward, and I saw it was vaguely man-shaped but twisted and wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending in directions no human joints could bend. The creature's skin was dark and scaled, glistening with moisture. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth like shards of broken glass. It spoke in a voice that resonated in my bones rather than my ears. It said it had been summoned here centuries ago by a sorcerer in service to an ancient king. The summoner had lost control, and the demon had torn him apart. Unable to return to its realm, it had hidden in the mews, feeding on animals and occasional humans. It said my birds could sense its presence, as all creatures of the air could feel its wrongness. The demon circled me slowly, its movements sinuous and predatory. It told me it was hungry, that it had been too long since it tasted human flesh. I backed toward the door, but it moved with impossible speed to block my escape. The creature reached for me with hands that ended in curved talons. I swung my lantern at it, and the oil spilled across its chest. Flames erupted, and the demon shrieked with rage rather than pain. The fire seemed to cause it no harm, but it recoiled from the light. I ran while it was distracted, bursting from the mews into the night. Behind me, I heard it howling, a sound that set dogs barking for miles around. I reported the encounter, but was accused of drunkenness and dismissed from my concerns. The next morning, 3 of my finest falcons were found dead, torn to pieces. The demon leaves offerings for me, dead animals arranged in patterns outside my cottage. It calls to me at night, promising a quick death if I return to the mews. I have not entered that building since, and warn all others to stay away. But I hear it moving in there, growing bolder as time passes. One day, it will emerge, and I fear what will happen when it does. Robert Fairfax, Royal Falconer. Hatfield House, Hertfordshire. 4th July, 1562. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Fairfax's testament was discovered among estate documents at Hatfield. The old mews were demolished in 1607, though records give no reason for their destruction. Local folklore speaks of a creature that haunted the grounds during the Tudor period. No physical evidence of the demon has been found, though the site remains notorious. End of file. Case file NOA1637H. Classification: Report of Royal Librarian. Date of statement: 19th September 1637. Location: Whitehall Palace, London, England. Report: I, Edward Pembroke, Royal Librarian, do report the cursed manuscript in the King's private collection. My duty is to catalogue and maintain His Majesty's extensive library of rare books and documents. Among the recent acquisitions was a medieval grimoire, bound in black leather. The book arrived from a monastery in France, confiscated during religious conflicts. From the moment I placed it on the shelf, I sensed something wrong about it. The leather was too warm, as if the book retained body heat. When I opened it to begin cataloguing, the pages seemed to resist turning. The text within was written in Latin, detailing rituals to summon and bind demons. But margin notes in a different hand warned that the book itself was possessed. A demon had been trapped within the pages by a medieval exorcist. Reading the rituals aloud would release it, giving it form in our world. I noted this warning and returned the book to its shelf, marking it as dangerous. That night, I worked late organizing new arrivals by candlelight. I heard pages turning in the locked case where I had placed the grimoire. When I investigated, the book lay open on the reading table, though I had secured it. It was open to a particular ritual, and the Latin words seemed to glow faintly. As I watched, an invisible force began turning more pages. The candles around me guttered and went out, leaving only the glowing text. A voice emerged from the book itself, speaking the ritual words. The voice was not human, resonating with harmonics that caused the very air to vibrate. I tried to close the book, but it would not shut, the pages rigid as iron. The voice grew louder, and shadows began to gather around the reading table. They coalesced into a shape, something tall and angular with too many joints. The entity that emerged was neither fully physical nor entirely spirit. It flickered between states of being, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. Its face was a horror, featuring multiple eyes arranged in spiral patterns. The demon spoke in the same voice that had read from the book. It thanked me for bringing it to this place of power, so close to the throne. It said it would use the library as its base, spreading its influence throughout the palace. The entity promised to whisper in the ears of counselors, to corrupt royal advisors. It would push the kingdom toward war and suffering, feeding on the chaos it created. I attempted to rebuke it with prayer, but my words came out backward and wrong. The demon laughed and touched the book with one elongated finger. More pages turned, revealing rituals that would strengthen it further. It commanded me to read them aloud, to give it more power. My mouth opened against my will, and I began to speak the words. Each syllable felt like poison on my tongue, burning as they passed my lips. I saw the demon growing larger, more solid, more present in our world. With desperate effort, I bit my own tongue, filling my mouth with blood. The pain broke its control, and I threw myself at the reading table. I knocked over candelabra, spilling burning wax across the book. The grimoire screamed, an inhuman sound of rage and pain. The demon flickered and faded, drawn back into its prison. I seized the book, still burning, and hurled it into the library's great fireplace. It burned with flames of unnatural colors, releasing foul smoke. Even as it burned, I heard the demon cursing me, promising vengeance. The book was reduced to ashes, but I fear the entity was merely weakened, not destroyed. I have sealed the library and posted guards, but I sense its presence still. Edward Pembroke, Royal Librarian, Whitehall Palace, London, 19th September, 1637. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Pembroke's report was filed with palace records and forgotten until rediscovered during research. He died 6 months after this incident under mysterious circumstances, found in the library with no clear cause of death. Subsequent librarians have reported unexplained phenomena, suggesting the demon's influence persists despite the grimoire's destruction. End of file. Case file NOA 1784C. Classification: Testimony of Royal Coachman. Date of statement: 27th March 1784. Location: Royal Mews, Buckingham House, London, England. Testimony: I, Benjamin Hughes, Royal Coachman, do testify about the phantom carriage that haunts the Mews. I have served the royal household for 30 years, caring for horses and maintaining carriages. The royal mews at Buckingham House are extensive, housing dozens of vehicles and animals. 3 months ago, workmen uncovered an old section of the mews that had been sealed. Within, they found a carriage of ancient design, black as midnight. The wood was rotted, the leather cracked, but the vehicle remained strangely intact. Against my advice, it was moved into the main carriage house for restoration. That very night, the haunting began. I was making my evening rounds when I heard the sound of horses and wheels. I looked out to see the black carriage rolling through the yard, pulled by 4 spectral horses. The horses were skeletal, their flesh hanging in tatters from their bones. Their eyes glowed with hellish light, and fire dripped from their mouths. The carriage itself seemed to shift and change as I watched. Sometimes it appeared whole and new, other times as the rotted wreck we had found. A figure sat in the driver's seat, dressed in livery from a bygone era. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see his hands on the reins. The hands were just bones, no flesh remaining on the skeletal fingers. The phantom coachman turned to look at me, and I saw beneath his hat. He had no face at all, just a skull with empty sockets that somehow still saw me. The carriage circled the yard 3 times, the horses' hooves making no sound on the cobbles. Then it rolled directly toward me at terrifying speed. I dove aside as it passed, feeling intense cold as it swept by. Through the carriage window, I glimpsed passengers inside. They were nobles in fine clothing, but their flesh was corrupted and rotting. They pressed against the windows, their mouths open in silent screams. I realized they were not passengers but prisoners, trapped in that cursed vehicle. The phantom coach stopped at the entrance to the sealed section from which it had come. The coachman turned in his seat and pointed one bony finger at me. He spoke in a voice like grinding stones, telling me the carriage's history. It had been built for a royal who practiced dark arts and made infernal bargains. This noble had used the carriage to transport victims to secret locations for sacrifice. Those murdered were bound into the vehicle itself, their souls powering its unholy existence. When the royal's crimes were discovered, the carriage was sealed away in haste. Now released, it sought new passengers to add to its collection. The coachman said it would ride every night until it filled its seats once more. He warned that anyone who rode in it would never leave, joining the screaming prisoners. The spectral horses reared and screamed, the sound finally breaking through their silence. The carriage vanished into the sealed section, disappearing through the solid wall. I ran to alert the palace guards, but found myself unable to speak of what I had seen. My tongue felt frozen, held by some spell the coachman had placed upon me. Only now, 3 months later, has the curse weakened enough for me to report this. Every night since, the phantom carriage rides, circling the mews. 2 stable boys have vanished, last seen near the old section at midnight. I believe they are now among the prisoners in that hellish coach. The carriage grows bolder, venturing farther from its original location. Soon it will leave the Mews entirely and prowl the streets of London. Benjamin Hughes, Royal Coachman. Royal Mews, Buckingham House. 27th March, 1784. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Hughes's testimony was recorded by a sympathetic official after the coachman's death 3 weeks later. The sealed section was reopened in 1791 and found to contain human remains and evidence of ritual activity. The black carriage itself had vanished. Sightings of a phantom coach continue to be reported near Buckingham Palace. End of file. Case file NOA 1529F. Classification: Account of Royal Astronomer. Date of statement: 6th November 1529. Location: Greenwich Palace, London, England. Account: I, Dr. Marcus Wolfe, Royal Astronomer, do account for the malevolent presence in the observation tower. My work requires me to study the heavens from the tower built specifically for this purpose. I spend many nights charting stars and planets, seeking knowledge in their movements. Last month, I noticed something unusual in my observations. A dark patch appeared in the sky, a region where no stars shone. Each night, this void grew larger, as if something was consuming the light. I observed it through my instruments and felt an inexplicable dread. The void was not merely absence of light, but something that actively repelled it. When I focused my telescope upon it, I saw movement within the darkness. Something massive was there, writhing and twisting like a nest of serpents. As I watched, I realized with horror that the thing was looking back at me. I felt its attention focus upon me across the vast emptiness of space. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was no longer in the tower. I stood in a place of absolute darkness, cold beyond imagining. Vast shapes moved around me, entities so large I could only perceive fragments. They spoke without voices, their communication resonating directly in my mind. These beings told me they had existed since before the stars were born. They dwelt in the spaces between worlds, feeding on light and life. They had noticed Earth, a small bright spark in their domain. Soon, they promised, they would descend and consume everything. The visions showed me humanity's future, cities falling into darkness, people wandering blind and mad as the entities fed upon the sun itself. The world would become cold and dead, added to their collection of devoured worlds. Then I was back in my tower, gasping and trembling. The telescope had shattered, its lenses cracked as if by enormous pressure. My notes were covered in writing I did not remember making. The words were in no language I knew, symbols that hurt my eyes to study. When I looked up at the sky, the void was directly overhead. It pulsed with malign awareness, and I knew it was marking this location. Since that night, I have been plagued by terrible dreams. I see the entities descending, their forms too vast to comprehend. They speak to me in my sleep, promising that I will be the first they take. My fellow astronomers report similar phenomena, seeing the void in their own observations. Some have gone mad, clawing out their own eyes to escape what they have seen. I have tried to warn the king, but my words sound like the ravings of a lunatic. The void grows larger each night, creeping across more of the sky. I calculate it will reach its full size within a year. When that happens, the entities will arrive, and the world will end in darkness. I continue my observations, documenting the approach of our doom. Perhaps future generations will find my notes and understand what destroyed us. But I fear there will be no future generations to find anything at all. Dr. Marcus Wolfe, Royal Astronomer. Greenwich Palace, London. 6th November, 1529. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Dr. Wolfe's account was discovered in palace records, filed and forgotten. He died shortly after this entry. Cause of death recorded as sudden madness. No astronomical records from the period confirm the void he described. However, his detailed observations suggest either a genuine phenomenon or a shared delusion affecting multiple astronomers. The description remains disturbing regardless of its veracity. End of file. Case file NOA 1691P. Classification Journal of Lady in Waiting. Date of statement 10th April 1691. Location Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, England. Journal I, Lady Anne Fitzroy, Lady in Waiting, do record the curse upon the Queen's apartments. I have attended Her Majesty for 5 years with devotion and care. The Queen's private apartments are lavishly appointed, filled with treasures from around the world. Among these is a mirror from Venice, framed in silver and quite magnificent. Her Majesty prizes this mirror above all her possessions, consulting it daily. 2 weeks ago, I noticed the reflection in the mirror was wrong. When Her Majesty stood before it, her reflection moved differently than she did. The reflection smiled when the Queen frowned, turned when she stood still. I mentioned this to Her Majesty, but she saw nothing amiss. The next day, the reflection was worse, openly mocking the Queen's movements. It made rude gestures and expressions while Her Majesty remained unaware. I began to suspect the mirror was showing not a reflection, but something else entirely. That night, I returned alone to the apartments to examine the mirror more closely. What I saw there froze my blood with terror. The reflection showed the room as it was, but occupied by figures that were not present. I saw a woman who resembled Her Majesty, but with a cruel and twisted expression. She wore the same gown, but it was stained with blood and torn. Around her stood other figures, all distorted versions of people I knew. They were engaged in acts of violence and depravity too terrible to describe. As I watched, the Mirror Queen turned and looked directly at me. She smiled, and I saw her teeth were filed to points. She spoke, her voice muffled as if coming through water. She said she was the true Queen, trapped behind the glass by witchcraft. The woman we all served was an impostor, a demon wearing stolen flesh. The mirror had been created to contain the real Queen, imprisoning her in reflection. But the spell was weakening, and soon she would break free. When she did, she promised revenge upon all who had served the impostor. She would reclaim her throne and punish the kingdom for forgetting her. The Mirror Queen pressed her hands against the glass from within. I saw the surface bulge outward, as if she was pushing through from the other side. Cracks appeared in the silvered surface, spreading like a spider's web. I heard her laughing, a sound of madness and rage. The other figures in the mirror moved closer, all pressing against the glass. They whispered my name, promising to come for me first. Suddenly, the real Queen entered the apartments, breaking the spell. The mirror returned to normal, showing only an ordinary reflection. But I know what I saw, and I know the truth. Something evil is trapped in that mirror, something that wants to escape. I tried to convince Her Majesty to remove it, but she refuses. She has become attached to the mirror in an unhealthy way. She spends hours before it, talking to her reflection. Sometimes I hear her having conversations, though she speaks both parts. I fear the thing in the mirror is influencing her, preparing for its emergence. The cracks I saw have not disappeared, though they are faint. Each day they grow slightly larger, the mirror weakening. When it finally breaks, I believe something terrible will be released. Lady Anne Fitzroy, Lady in Waiting, Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, 10th April, 1691. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Lady Anne's journal was found among personal papers at Hampton Court. The Venetian mirror she describes was shattered under mysterious circumstances in 1693. The Queen suffered a severe decline in mental health afterward, dying within the year. No explanation for these events has been satisfactorily established. End of file. Case file NOA 1726D. Classification: Report of Royal Huntsman. Date of statement: 15th August 1726. Location: Windsor Great Park, Berkshire, England. Report: I, Thomas Blackwood, Royal Huntsman, do report the demon that haunts the ancient oak. I have hunted in Windsor Great Park for 20 years, knowing every tree and path. At the heart of the forest stands an oak of immense age, older than memory. Local folk avoid it, speaking of curses and disappearances dating back centuries. I paid such tales no heed until I encountered the truth myself. Last month, I pursued a stag deep into the forest at twilight. The beast led me to the ancient oak and vanished into the undergrowth. As I approached the tree, I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The oak was massive, its trunk wide enough to hold a room within. Indeed, there was an opening at its base, a hollow that led into darkness. Against my better judgment, I peered inside and saw movement. Eyes opened in the darkness, dozens of them, all watching me. A voice spoke from within the tree, ancient and filled with malice. It said it had dwelt in this oak since before humans walked these lands. When the first people came, they worshipped it, making sacrifices at its roots. For centuries, it had been fed blood and flesh, growing strong on death. Then the new religion came, and the sacrifices stopped. The entity had retreated into the tree, sleeping but not dead. Now it was awakening, hungry after its long fast. It reached out from the hollow, and I saw a hand that was not quite human. The fingers were too long, tipped with claws of black horn. The skin was bark-like, covered in moss and crawling with insects. I tried to run, but found my legs would not obey. The demon pulled itself from the tree, emerging into the fading light. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of human and plant. Branches grew from its shoulders like wings, leaves rustling with its breath. Its face was almost human but wrong, features arranged in unsettling patterns. When it opened its mouth, I saw it was filled with thorns instead of teeth. The demon told me it had claimed this forest as its domain. Any who entered would be tested, and the weak would feed it. It showed me visions of people who had vanished in the park over the years. I saw them transformed into trees, their bodies fused with wood and root. They remained conscious, trapped and aware, feeling every season pass. The demon promised this would be my fate unless I served it. I was to bring it offerings, animals first, then eventually humans. In return, it would grant me power over the forest and all within it. I refused, and it attacked with terrible speed. Thorny vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around my limbs. They tightened, piercing my skin, and I felt my blood being drained. I managed to draw my knife and cut through the vines. I ran, crashing through undergrowth, not daring to look back. Behind me, I heard the demon's laughter and the sound of trees moving. I emerged from the forest as full darkness fell, barely escaping. My wounds will not heal properly, remaining inflamed and painful. Wood seems to be growing in the cuts, small shoots emerging from my flesh. I fear I am being slowly transformed, claimed by the demon despite my escape. Others have reported hearing voices from the ancient oak, calling them into the forest. 3 servants from the palace have vanished in the park this month alone. I believe the demon is growing stronger, expanding its territory. Soon it will emerge from the forest entirely, claiming the palace grounds. Thomas Blackwood, Royal Huntsman. Windsor, Great Park, Berkshire. 15th August, 1726. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Blackwood's report was filed with park management records. He disappeared 6 weeks after this account, last seen walking toward the ancient oak. The tree was struck by lightning in 1804 and burned, but the trunk remained standing. Park rangers continue to report unexplained phenomena in the area surrounding it. End of file. Case file NOA 1573K. Classification: Testimony of Royal Baker. Date of statement: 22nd December 1573. Location: Richmond Palace, Surrey, England. Testimony: I, William Archer, Royal Baker, do testify about the haunted ovens in the palace kitchens. I have baked bread for the royal table for 15 years without incident. The kitchens at Richmond are extensive, with great ovens built into the walls. One oven, the oldest and largest, has always been troublesome. Bread baked in it comes out burned or spoiled, regardless of my care. I asked to have it sealed, but was told all ovens must remain in service. Last week, I was working alone late at night, preparing dough for the morning. I heard sounds coming from within the old oven, despite no fire burning. There was scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I opened the oven door to investigate and immediately regretted it. A wave of heat struck me, though the oven had been cold for hours. The interior glowed with a red light that came from no natural fire. I saw shapes moving in that hellish glow, human forms writhing in agony, faces pressed against the hot stone, mouths open in silent screams. A voice spoke from within the oven, addressing me by name. It said the oven was a gateway, connecting the palace to a place of torment. Long ago, a baker had murdered his apprentice and disposed of the body by burning it. The apprentice's soul could not rest, and its anguish opened a crack between worlds. Now demons use the oven as a passage, entering our realm to feed on suffering. They whispered to people in the palace, encouraging cruelty and violence. The voice told me I had been chosen to serve them, to help widen the gateway. I was to begin by baking poisoned bread, killing those who ate it. Their deaths would nourish the demons and weaken the barrier further. Eventually, the gateway would open completely, allowing legions to pour through. I refused, and hands reached out from the oven, grasping at me. The hands were skeletal, burned black by eternal flames. They grabbed my arms and tried to pull me into the oven. I felt the terrible heat singing my skin and clothing. I struggled desperately, bracing myself against the oven's mouth. More hands emerged, dozens of them, all clutching and pulling. I heard the demons laughing, promising to cook me slowly in their fires. My strength was failing, my grip loosening. Just as I was about to be dragged inside, another baker entered the kitchen. His presence seemed to weaken the demons, and they released me. I fell backward. My arms burned and my hair singed. The other baker saw nothing amiss, but I know what attacked me. The old oven remains, and I hear the demons inside it every night. They call to me, promising power if I will serve them. They threaten torture if I continue to refuse. The burns on my arms will not heal, and I can feel the heat still radiating from them. I have tried to convince others to seal the oven permanently, but every time plans are made, accidents occur, preventing the work. The demons protect their gateway, ensuring it remains open. I fear they will eventually claim me or find another who will serve them. The palace is in danger, built atop a doorway to damnation. William Archer, Royal Baker, Richmond Palace, Surrey, 22nd December, 1573. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Archer's testimony was preserved in palace kitchen records. The oven he describes was finally removed during renovations in 1649. Workmen reported finding human bones mixed with ash in its depths. Richmond Palace fell into ruin after the Civil War and was largely demolished. The kitchen site remains, though nothing now stands there. End of file. Case file NOA 1658M. Classification: Account of Royal Physician. Date of statement: 7th May 1658. Location: Whitehall Palace, London, England. Account: I, Dr. Samuel Greaves. Royal Physician, do account for the plague spirit in the sick room. My duty is to attend the ill within the royal household. A wing of the palace was sealed after outbreak of plague claimed many lives. That was 20 years past, yet the rooms remain locked and abandoned. Last month, a new servant unknowingly opened the sealed ward. Within days, people began falling ill with symptoms resembling the old plague. I was called to examine the afflicted and provide treatment. When I entered the sick room, I immediately sensed something unnatural. The air was thick and foul, despite the windows being open. A greenish mist hung near the ceiling, drifting with its own movement. The patients lay in fever, their skin covered with dark marks. But these marks moved, crawling across their flesh like living things. I approached to examine the first patient and felt icy breath on my neck. I turned and saw a figure standing behind me. It was tall and emaciated, wrapped in burial shrouds gone black with age. Its face was a skull with ragged flesh clinging to the bone. The eye sockets glowed with sickly yellow light. In one skeletal hand, it carried a staff topped with a human skull. The creature spoke in a voice like wind through a graveyard. It announced itself as the plague bringer, a spirit born from mass death. When the pestilence swept through the palace, so many died that their collective fear and suffering gave it form. Now it dwelt in the sealed ward, feeding on lingering sickness. The servant who opened the doors had released it to spread again. It said it was not content with the few patients here. It wanted to infect the entire palace, then the city, then the world. The plague bringer promised an age of death that would dwarf all previous plagues. It would ride across the land, leaving corpses in mountains behind it. I attempted to drive it away with prayers, but it only laughed. It touched its staff to the floor, and the greenish mist descended. Where the mist touched the patients, their conditions worsened dramatically. Their skin turned black, and blood poured from their mouths and eyes. I tried to flee, but found the door locked from outside. The plague bringer circled the room, touching each patient with its staff. They began to rise from their beds, moving with jerky motions. Their eyes were empty, their minds consumed by the plague spirit. They turned towards me, reaching out with grasping hands. I realized it intended to make me its next victim, to add me to its collection. The plague-ridden patients surrounded me, their touch cold as death. I felt their disease trying to enter my body, to consume me from within. In desperation, I shattered a window and threw myself through it. I fell into the courtyard below, breaking my leg but escaping the sick room. When guards came, they found the room empty. Patience and spirit vanished. But I know they did not truly disappear. They are hiding within the palace walls. I have fallen ill myself, displaying the same symptoms as those I tried to treat. The dark marks crawl across my skin, and I feel the plague consuming me. The plague bringer visits me in dreams, showing me visions of the death it will bring. I fear I am becoming one of its servants, that my body will rise after I die. The sealed ward must be burned, the entire wing torn down and consecrated. Otherwise, the plague spirit will continue to grow stronger. Dr. Samuel Greaves, Royal Physician, Whitehall Palace, London. 7th May 1658. Archive note. Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Greaves died 3 days after recording this account. The sealed ward was destroyed by fire shortly thereafter, along with much of that wing of the palace. Historical records confirm an outbreak of unexplained illness during this period. Whether the plague bringer was destroyed or merely dispersed remains uncertain. End of file. Case file. NOA 179-2S. Classification. Journal of Royal Secretary. Date of statement. 3rd October 1792. Location. St. James's Palace, London, England. Journal. I, Jonathan Hartley, Royal Secretary, do record the entity that inhabits the document room. My work requires me to organize and maintain royal correspondence and official papers. The document room is vast, filled with centuries of records stored in cabinets and shelves. I spend many hours alone there, sorting and cataloguing historical materials. 6 months ago, I began to notice papers moving when I was not looking. Documents I had filed would appear on different shelves. Letters I had placed in chronological order would be rearranged. At first, I blamed my own forgetfulness, but the occurrences increased. I started finding new documents that should not exist. Letters written in hands I recognized, but discussing events that never occurred. Royal decrees that contradicted known history, signed with authentic seals. I began to suspect someone was adding forgeries to confuse the historical record. Then I discovered the truth was far more sinister than fraud. One evening, as I worked late, organizing correspondence from the previous century, I heard paper rustling. The sound came from a section I had just organized, now in complete disarray. As I watched, documents flew from their shelves and swirled through the air. They formed patterns, shapes that hurt my eyes to perceive. The papers began to stick together, creating a roughly humanoid form. It was tall and thin, composed entirely of documents layered upon themselves. Where its face should have been, there was only text, words constantly shifting and changing. The creature spoke, its voice a whisper of turning pages. It said it was the archive, born from the accumulated weight of recorded history. Every lie written in official documents, every truth suppressed, had fed it. It had grown sentient over centuries, learning to manipulate the papers that gave it form. Now it sought to rewrite history itself, changing the past through altered documents. It showed me what it had already accomplished. Kings who never existed now had complete official records. Wars that never happened were documented in meticulous detail. The archive was creating a false history that would eventually replace the true one. When enough people read the altered documents and believed them, reality itself would change. The past would reshape itself to match the archive's version. It told me I was to help in this great work, to spread the false documents throughout the kingdom. I refused, and the creature grew angry. Papers flew at me like knives, cutting my face and hands. Documents wrapped around my throat, trying to suffocate me. I tore them away and ran from the room, barely escaping. When I returned with others, everything appeared normal. The documents were properly filed, showing no sign of disturbance. But I found papers in my own handwriting that I never wrote. Letters bearing my signature, discussing my agreement to serve the archive. It is framing me, creating false evidence of my cooperation. I have tried to remove these documents, but more appear every day. The archive is patient, methodically building its false history. I see its influence spreading, small changes appearing in records throughout the palace. Dates shift by days or weeks. Names alter slightly. Events change in subtle ways. No one else notices, but I see the reality unraveling around us. The archive whispers to me at night, promising to erase me from history entirely. It will replace every mention of my name with someone else, eliminating my existence. I will become a ghost in my own life, remembered by no one. Jonathan Hartley, Royal Secretary, St. James's Palace, London, 3rd October, 1792. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. No official records confirm the existence of a Jonathan Hartley serving as Royal Secretary during this period. This journal was discovered loose in palace archives with no filing information. The handwriting does not match any known palace employee. Either this is an elaborate hoax, or the archive succeeded in erasing the author. The implications are deeply disturbing. End of file. Case file. NOA1546L. Classification. Report of Royal Clockmaker. Date of statement, 11th June, 1546. Location, Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, England. Report. I, Master Thomas Devereux, Royal Clockmaker, do report the cursed timepiece in the King's chambers. I was commissioned to create a magnificent clock for His Majesty's private rooms. I laboured for 2 years on this masterwork, incorporating every skill I possessed. The clock was to be my greatest achievement, securing my reputation forever. When it was finally complete, I installed it myself in the King's chambers. It kept perfect time, its mechanisms working with flawless precision. His Majesty was pleased, and I departed satisfied with my work. 3 days later, I was summoned urgently back to the palace. The King's attendants reported strange occurrences connected to the clock. It had begun to chime at incorrect hours, marking times that did not match reality. When it struck 13, terrible things happened in the palace. A courtier dropped dead at the exact moment of the 13th chime. When I arrived to investigate, I found the clock had changed. It now displayed not just hours but dates far in the future. As I watched, the hands moved backward, then forward, then stopped at random times. The clock face showed a date 20 years hence, then jumped to the previous century. I opened the clock to examine the mechanisms and discovered my error. In my efforts to create perfection, I had used metal from a melted church bell. That bell had been cursed by a witch before she was burned for her crimes. She had promised the bell would bring doom to any who heard it ring. Now that curse lived in my clock, animating it with malevolent purpose. As I reached into the mechanisms, the clock attacked me. Gears seized my fingers, crushing them with terrible force. I screamed and pulled back, leaving 2 fingers behind. Blood dripped into the clock's workings, and it seemed to absorb the fluid. The hands began to spin wildly, and images appeared on the clock face. I saw visions of future disasters, wars and plagues and famines. Each vision was accompanied by the date on which it would occur. The clock was not just telling time, but showing the future itself. But the visions were not warnings. They were promises. The cursed clock was making these events happen, bringing disasters into reality. It showed me the king's death, the exact moment and method. It showed the realm torn apart by religious conflict and civil war. Every chime brought these futures closer to manifestation. I tried to destroy the clock, smashing it with a hammer. But the metal refused to break, the hammer bouncing off harmlessly. The clock laughed at me with the witch's voice, emanating from its mechanisms. It said it would continue its work until every future it showed had come to pass. The clock would outlive kingdoms and dynasties, bringing doom to all who heard it. I fled the palace and have since gone into hiding. I learned later that attempts to remove the clock have failed. It cannot be moved, as if fixed to that spot by supernatural force. His Majesty has abandoned those chambers, unable to bear the clock's presence. But it continues to chime, marking hours that bring us closer to the disasters it predicts. I curse the day I created that damn timepiece. My masterwork has become an instrument of fate itself. Master Thomas Devereux, Royal Clockmaker, Hampton Court Palace, Surrey, 11th June, 1546. Archive note, Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Devereux was never heard from again after filing this report. The cursed clock was supposedly destroyed during renovations in 1689, though no record confirms this. Some historians claim it was hidden rather than destroyed, secreted somewhere in the palace. Occasionally, palace staff report hearing 13 chimes when no clock is near. End of file. Case file NOA 1674W. Classification: Testimony of Royal Equerry. Date of statement: 24th September 1674. Location: Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. Testimony: I, Richard Pemberton, Royal Equerry, do testify about the demon horse in the royal stables. I am responsible for the care and management of His Majesty's finest horses. Last month, a magnificent black stallion arrived as a gift from a foreign ambassador. The horse was of exceptional beauty and apparent breeding. His Majesty was pleased with the gift and ordered it given the best accommodations. I placed the stallion in the stable's finest stall and attended to it personally. From the first night, the other horses behaved strangely in its presence. They would not eat or rest, standing pressed against their stall walls. They whinnied in fear whenever the black stallion moved. I attributed this to the newcomer's strong personality and expected them to adjust. But the situation only worsened as days passed. The black stallion required no food or water, yet remained vigorous and strong. Its eyes glowed faintly red in darkness, which I initially dismissed as reflected light. Then the accidents began. Grooms working near the stallion's stall suffered mysterious injuries. One man's arm was broken, though no one saw what happened. Another was kicked by the stallion with such force he flew across the stable. The horse had not appeared to move, yet the man bore the imprint of a hoof. I decided to examine the stallion more closely. When I entered its stall alone, I finally saw its true nature. The horse turned to face me, and its eyes were not those of any earthly animal. They contained a malevolent intelligence, ancient and cruel. The stallion spoke to me in a human voice. though its mouth did not move. It said, it was no horse but a demon taking equine form. It had been sent to infiltrate the palace and corrupt the royal household from within. Those who rode it would fall under its influence, their minds slowly turning to evil. Eventually, it would carry the king himself, claiming his soul while he sat in its saddle. The demon described its plans in terrible detail. It would spread chaos and violence, turning the royal family against one another. It would cause accidents that killed key advisors and loyal servants. Under its influence, the kingdom would fall into tyranny and bloodshed. I backed away in horror, but the creature moved to block the stall door. It reared up, and I saw its hooves were not natural, but iron shod with silver symbols. These were signs of binding, a spell that held it in horse form. The demon said a foolish sorcerer had tried to control it, failing miserably. Now it served no one but itself, using the bindings to maintain its disguise. It kicked at me with those cursed hooves, missing by mere inches. I rolled under its belly and escaped through the stall door. I immediately reported what I had learned, but was not believed. The king had already developed an attachment to the beautiful stallion. Plans were made for His Majesty to ride it in the next royal procession. I attempted to prevent this and was accused of jealousy over the foreign gift. I was removed from my position and barred from the stables. 3 days later, the royal procession occurred as planned. His Majesty rode the black stallion through the streets of Windsor. When he returned, he was changed, speaking harshly to his advisors. He has grown increasingly tyrannical since that day, making cruel decisions. I believe the demon has claimed him, just as it promised. The black stallion remains in the royal stables, waiting for its next victim. Richard Pemberton, Royal Equerry, Windsor Castle, Berkshire, 24th September 1674. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Pemberton's testimony was dismissed as slander and he died in poverty. However, records show the black stallion vanished from the stables under mysterious circumstances in 1626. The king's personality did change markedly after the date mentioned, becoming notably more authoritarian. Whether these facts are connected remains a matter of interpretation rather than evidence. End of file. Case file NOA 1751B. Classification: Account of Royal Falconer. Date of statement: 13th March 1751. Location: Kensington Palace, London, England. Account: I, Edward Thornhill. Royal Falconer, do account for the shadow that hunts in the palace gardens. My duties include maintaining the royal hunting birds and training them for sport. I exercise the falcons daily in the palace gardens, a practice I have followed for years. 1 month ago, the birds began to behave unusually during their flights. They would suddenly cry out in alarm and refuse to return to my glove. Instead, they would circle high overhead, keeping far from the ground. I thought perhaps a fox or cat was disturbing them. But when I searched the gardens, I found nothing that would frighten trained hunting birds. The behavior continued and worsened, the falcons becoming increasingly agitated. Then, one evening, as twilight fell, I saw what was frightening them. A shadow moved across the garden lawn, though no object cast it. It was roughly man-shaped but distorted, with limbs too long and angular. The shadow moved independently, gliding over grass and through hedges. Where it passed, plants withered immediately, grass turning brown and flowers dying. I called out, thinking someone was playing tricks with lanterns. The shadow stopped and turned toward me. though it had no head or face. It flowed across the ground like spilled ink, approaching with disturbing speed. My falcon screamed in terror and tore itself free from my glove. The shadow reached me and began to climb my body. I felt intense cold spreading from every point of contact. The shadow covered my legs, and I lost all feeling in them. I fell to the ground as sensation vanished from my lower body. The shadow continued upward, consuming more of me. Where it touched, I saw through its darkness into some other place, glimpsed a world of shadows where pale things moved in eternal twilight. The shadow beings there noticed me looking through and began to move toward the opening. They wanted to cross over, to enter our world through the connection. I realized the shadow consuming me was creating a doorway between realms. If it covered me completely, the barrier would break, releasing the shadow creatures. I fought with desperate strength, tearing at the darkness with my hands. My fingers passed through it like smoke, but each swipe seemed to damage it. The shadow recoiled slightly, and I pressed my advantage. I rolled across the ground, trying to scrape it off against the earth. Where the shadow touched soil, it sank into the ground, seeping away. Finally, I broke free, though my legs remained numb and useless. The shadow retreated into the flower beds, disappearing beneath the surface. But I know it remains there, waiting for another opportunity. Since that night, I refuse to enter the gardens after dark. I have warned others, but my story is dismissed as fevered imagination. Yet dead patches appear throughout the gardens where nothing will grow. The shadow is spreading, claiming more territory each night. I have seen it moving beneath windows, climbing palace walls. It is seeking entry to the palace itself, looking for victims to consume. My legs have regained some feeling, but remain weak and painful. I fear permanent damage from the shadow's touch. Worse, I sometimes see shadows moving wrongly around me against the light. I believe the creature left part of itself in me, a seed that may grow. Edward Thornhill, Royal Falconer, Kensington Palace, London, 13th March, 1751. Archive note: Dr. Nathaniel Ashcroft. Thornhill left palace service shortly after this account and died within the year from unexplained wasting illness. Palace garden records note repeated failures of plants in certain areas during this period. Modern staff occasionally report shadow phenomena, particularly near the sections Thornhill identified. No satisfactory explanation has been established. End of file. Case closed to public record. The original document remains sealed within the vaults of the British Museum. The NOA archive remains committed to documenting phenomena that defy conventional understanding. These cases are submitted for academic review and further investigation. Further access requires written authorization or curiosity strong enough to ignore the warnings. Until next time, these are the National Occult Archives.